How much oxygen is left in a room once the world decides you no longer exist? In 2008, two teenagers released a song that became the anthem of a generation, a multi-platinum masterpiece about the desperation of losing someone you love. But just 1 year later, a single night of violence in Los Angeles turned that duet into a haunting irony. While the industry scrambled to scrub his name from every playlist, the girl known for her wholesome American Idol image stayed curiously still. Why did Jordin Sparks choose to stand in the eye of the storm when everyone else was running for cover? Is it possible that the girl with the purest reputation in pop music saw something the public was never meant to see? 17 years of whispers, forced silences, and strategic loyalty have led to this moment. What happens when the silence finally breaks? The no-air midnight studio session. The year 2008 felt like a fever dream for pop music. The industry was undergoing a massive shift, moving away from the era of physical CDs and into the digital dominance of ringtones and early YouTube. At the center of this transformation stood two individuals who represented the absolute peak of commercial potential. Jordin Sparks was the 17-year-old darling of America, having just become the youngest winner in the history of American Idol. She was the personification of wholesome success, a girl with a powerful voice and an untouched reputation. On the other side was Chris Brown, a 19-year-old wonder who was already being compared to Michael Jackson and Usher. He was the golden boy of R&B, a charismatic performer who seemed incapable of missing the mark. When these two entered the studio to record No Air, the atmosphere was thick with the kind of professional tension that only exists when two stars are at the top of their game. The recording session was not just another day at the office. It was a strategic move by labels to pair the purity of a singing competition winner with the streetwise edge of a growing R&B icon. The session itself took place in the quiet hours, those midnight slots where the outside world fades away and the focus is entirely on the technicality of the vocal. It is in these moments that real bonds are often forged, away from the prying eyes of publicists and the flashbulbs of the paparazzi. The song was built on a simple yet suffocating metaphor. It spoke of a love so intense that losing it felt like losing the ability to breathe. For Sparks, it was a transition from her idol persona into a more mature, relatable artist. For Brown, it was a chance to show his softer, more melodic side after the high-energy dance tracks that made him famous. When the track finally hit the airwaves in February 2008, it did more than just climb the charts. It became a cultural phenomenon. It eventually moved over 3 million units, earning a triple platinum certification and staying on the Billboard Hot 100 for 30 weeks. However, the success of the song created a permanent link between their legacies. To the public, they were the perfect duo. They looked like the future of black excellence in pop music, representing a clean, aspirational version of young stardom. They traveled the world together, performed on the biggest stages, and shared the kind of early career milestones that create a unique sense of camaraderie. There was no social media as we know it today to dissect their every move, so the public only saw the polished finished product. They saw the chemistry in the music video, the blue-hued lighting, and the synchronized vocals that suggested a deep mutual respect. This period was the last time their careers would ever be simple. They were living in a bubble of universal acclaim, unaware that the industry machine was already preparing for a pivot. While the world saw two stars reaching the summit, the reality of the music business was that their brands were being tied together in a knot that neither of them would be able to fully untie for the next 17 years. This chapter of their lives was the foundation of everything that followed. It was the moment of absolute clarity before the storm of 2009 would complicate their friendship, their professional standing, and their public identities forever. The 2009 Grammy Eve incident, a forced silence. The date was February 8th, 2009, and the atmosphere in Los Angeles was electric with the anticipation of the 51st Annual Grammy Awards. For Jordin Sparks, this was supposed to be the definitive victory lap of her young career. No Air was not just a radio hit, it was a nominee for Best Pop Collaboration with Vocals. The song had spent months hovering at the top of the charts, and the industry consensus was that Sparks and Chris Brown were the frontrunners for the trophy. However, as the sun began to set over the red carpet, the energy shifted from celebration to a chilling, confused silence. Sparks arrived at the venue as an 18-year-old girl who had spent the last 2 years in a bubble of positive reinforcement. She had not attended the famous Clive Davis pre-Grammy party the night before, meaning she was one of the few people in the inner circle who was completely unaware of the physical altercation that had occurred between Chris Brown and Rihanna. In recent years, Sparks has begun to pull back the curtain on what those first few moments of the scandal felt like from the inside. She described stepping onto the red carpet and being immediately intercepted by label publicists. These were the gatekeepers of her image, and their message was blunt and terrifying. They told her that she knew nothing, At the time, she was confused by the demand, but the gravity of the situation became clear as her phone began to vibrate with a relentless stream of Google alerts and breaking news headlines. While the rest of the world watched the drama unfold through grainy police reports and tabloid speculation, Sparks was trapped in a professional limbo. The man she had shared a stage with for a year was suddenly the most toxic figure in the global entertainment industry. The internal pressure from the label was absolute. They needed to protect their American Idol winner from the fallout of a domestic violence case that was rapidly becoming the biggest story in the world. This resulted in a forced silence that was both strategic and isolating. Sparks was instructed to stay away from the topic, to remain neutral, and to continue as if her chart-topping collaborator had not just become a pariah overnight. The consequences of that night were immediate and measurable. During the ceremony, the award for Best Pop Collaboration with Vocals was announced. Despite the massive commercial success of No Air, the trophy went to Robert Plant and Alison Krauss. In later reflections, Sparks admitted that she felt the loss was directly tied to the scandal. The song that was once the pride of her discography suddenly became a liability. The radio stations that had played the track every hour began to pull it from their rotations to avoid the backlash of airing Brown's voice. Sparks was left to navigate the wreckage of a promotional cycle that had been ghosted by the industry. This was the beginning of a long, quiet era for Sparks, where she had to balance her personal feelings of loyalty with the cold reality of career survival. She has often spoken about how she did not understand the puppetry of the music business at that age. She was a kid caught in a corporate machine that was frantically trying to distance its clean star from a dark tragedy. The silence that began on that 2009 red carpet was not her choice, but it became the foundation of a reputation for unwavering, quiet loyalty that would eventually baffle the public 17 years later. She learned early on that, in the entertainment world, the truth is often less important than the narrative, and the narrative that night was that Jordin Sparks was better off standing alone. Jordin's 2014 Access Hollywood defense. By 2014, the initial shock of the 2009 incident had settled into a permanent stain on the industry. Yet the music world remained deeply divided on how to handle the ghost of Chris Brown. While many major networks and high-profile brands were still practicing a cautious avoidance, Jordin Sparks made a deliberate choice to shift her stance from passive bystander to active defender. This shift was crystallized during an interview with Access Hollywood, a platform that typically favored the lighthearted and the promotional. However, the conversation quickly veered into the psychological and the personal when the topic of her former collaborator was raised. The interview served as a public breaking point for the silence Sparks had maintained for half a decade. She spoke with a level of conviction that seemed to catch the entertainment world off guard. She told the interviewer that Chris Brown was still a human being and that people make mistakes. This specific framing was a significant departure from the media narrative of the time, which largely characterized Brown as a cautionary tale or a permanent villain. By using the word mistake, Sparks was not just offering a friendly sentiment, she was participating in a massive effort to rehumanize a man who had become a symbol of toxicity. Her defense was anchored in the idea of growth and redemption, concepts that were beginning to clash with the rising tide of accountability culture. Sparks argued that the public and the industry needed to look past the individual actions of a person's youth and focus on their capacity for change. She appeared to be speaking from a place of deep personal knowing, suggesting that the version of the man she worked with in the midnight sessions of 2008 was the true version, while the public scandal was an aberration. This creates an interesting psychological dynamic. It suggests that Sparks believed she possessed a unique insight into his character that the general public was simply incapable of seeing through the lens of a police report. The reaction to the interview was swift and polarizing. For a portion of the audience, Sparks was seen as a voice of reason and grace in an unforgiving industry. They viewed her as a loyal friend who refused to abandon a peer when the stakes were highest. However, for another segment of the public, her comments were deeply problematic. Critics argued that by minimizing a documented assault as a mistake, she was using her wholesome brand to sanitize a history of violence. The controversy highlighted the unique position Sparks occupied. Because she was perceived as the good girl of pop, her endorsement carried a weight that few other artists could provide. She was effectively lending her unblemished reputation to a man whose own credibility was in tatters. This 2014 moment was the first time the public saw a crack in the carefully managed image of Jordin Sparks. She was no longer just a young girl who sang a hit song. She was a woman making a definitive moral choice in a very public arena. This chapter of her career reveals the immense pressure placed on Black female artists to serve as the emotional or moral compass for their male counterparts. Sparks was essentially acting as a shield, positioning herself between the media and a man who was still radioactive to many advertisers. It was a gamble that demonstrated her loyalty was not just a relic of 2008, but a living, breathing part of her professional identity. The Access Hollywood interview marked a transition in the narrative from what happened that night at the Grammys to how long must a person pay for their past? By forcing this question into the mainstream, Sparks ensured that her legacy would forever be tied to the ongoing debate over forgiveness and accountability in Hollywood. She was no longer a victim of a ghosted promotion. She was a participant in a long-form redemption arc that would take another decade to fully materialize. The 2022 AMA cancellation controversy. The American Music Awards in 2022 were designed to be a landmark celebration of the 40th anniversary of Michael Jackson's Thriller. For the production team and the fans, the highlight of the night was supposed to be a massive high-energy tribute performed by Chris Brown and Shari. However, just days before the live broadcast, the performance was abruptly scrapped by the network. This decision ignited a firestorm of controversy that forced several prominent figures to take a side in a battle between corporate interests and artistic redemption. The technical reason for the cancellation was described by the production company, Dick Clark Productions, as a simple matter of creative direction not aligning. But the narrative behind the scenes was much more complex. Reports began to surface that higher-level executives at Disney and ABC became uncomfortable with the idea of a convicted domestic abuser headlining a tribute to an artist who had his own share of controversial legal history. The optics were deemed too radioactive for a primetime family network. When the performance was pulled, Chris Brown took to social media to share rehearsal footage, showing the intricate choreography and the immense effort he had put into the set. The video went viral instantly, creating a wave of public sympathy for an artist who felt he was being shadow banned by the very industry that continued to profit from his catalog. During the actual awards ceremony, the tension reached a breaking point. When Chris Brown was announced as the winner of Favorite Male R&B Artist, a noticeable portion of the live audience began to boo. Kelly Rowland, who was on stage to present the award, famously held up a finger and told the crowd to chill out. She accepted the trophy on his behalf and used her platform to demand that the industry give him grace. This moment of public defiance set the stage for Jordin Sparks to weigh in with her most forceful defense to date. In a sidewalk interview with TMZ and subsequent red carpet appearances, Sparks abandoned the cautious neutrality that publicists had urged her to maintain in the past. She stated clearly that the cancellation was wrong and that the focus should remain on the talent rather than the history. She told the camera that she thought his past should not even be a conversation anymore. This was a significant escalation in her rhetoric. She was no longer just saying that people make mistakes. She was actively arguing that there should be a statute of limitations on public accountability for a person who has consistently worked and contributed to the culture. Sparks used the phrase, "him especially," when discussing who deserves the right to grow and learn without their past hanging over them. This specific phrasing suggested a deep-seated belief that Brown had been unfairly targeted or held to a higher standard than other problematic figures in Hollywood. By joining the chorus of support led by Kelly Rowland, Sparks was positioning herself as part of a coalition of black female artists who were refusing to allow a black male peer to be erased from industry milestones. The 2022 controversy revealed a growing rift between the corporate gatekeepers and the artists who actually inhabit the world of celebrity. To the networks, the cancellation was a safe business move to avoid advertiser backlash. But to Sparks, it was a betrayal of the artistic community. Her defense during this period was not about a hit song from 2008, it was about the current state of industry power dynamics. She was observing a pattern where the machine uses an artist for their talent until a controversy makes them inconvenient, at which point the machine tries to rewrite history. By standing her ground, Sparks was insisting that the history of their collaboration and the man himself still had a place in the modern landscape. This shows Sparks moving into a role of industry analyst. She was no longer the young girl from American Idol who was being told what to say. She was an established veteran who was willing to risk her own standing with major networks like ABC to speak her truth. The AM. As incident proved that the bond between Sparks and Brown was not a relic of the past, but a functioning, active alliance that was willing to challenge the highest levels of entertainment leadership. 17 years later, the reunion. Breaking point. 17 years is a lifetime in the world of pop music. It is an interval long enough for entire genres to rise and fall, for teenagers to become parents, and for the public to move through several cycles of collective outrage and collective amnesia. By 2025 and 2026, the relationship between Jordin Sparks and Chris Brown had reached what many industry analysts call a breaking point. This was no longer about a nostalgic hit from the late 2000s. It had evolved into a definitive statement on the resilience of industry bonds and the refusal of certain artists to yield to the pressure of permanent cancellation. The reunion that sent shockwaves through social media was not a televised event or a high-budget music video. Instead, it was a series of live performances and candid social media interactions that highlighted a shocking level of vocal and physical chemistry that had remained intact since 2008, when Sparks and Brown shared the stage during his Under the Influence tour and subsequent 2024 and 2025 dates. The atmosphere was different from their early days. In 2008, they were peers competing for the top spot. 17 years later, the dynamic shifted. Sparks appeared as a steadfast witness to his survival, and Brown appeared as a man who had successfully navigated the wreckage of his own reputation. Fans and critics alike began to analyze the deeper psychological layers of this reunion. There's a recurring narrative in fan circles and cultural commentary that explores the idea of a shared industry trauma. Both Sparks and Brown were thrust into the global spotlight as children. They were the products of a machine that demanded absolute perfection and high-yield productivity. Some cultural commentators have suggested that their bond is a form of protection. In an industry that often discards artists once they become complicated or aging, Sparks and Brown represent a defiant continuity. They are the survivors of an era that was much more restrictive in its moral requirements for stars. During this period, Sparks became even more vocal about her reasons for breaking her long-standing silence. In various podcast appearances and interviews, she began to articulate a philosophy of radical loyalty. She moved away from the simple defenses of the past and started talking about the reality of the human condition in the entertainment business. She addressed the fact that while the public sees a celebrity as a brand or a headline, she sees the person who was there during the midnight studio sessions when the cameras were off. This perspective creates a curiosity gap for the audience. It forces the public to ask what Sparks knows that they do not. There have also been darker, more speculative theories surrounding their longevity. Some observers point to the similarities in their career paths despite their vastly different public images. While Sparks has maintained a reputation for being clean and family-oriented, her unwavering support for a man often associated with industry chaos has led to intense speculation. These theories often touch on the idea of the industry as a restrictive environment where artists are forced into specific boxes. By reuniting with Brown, Sparks is essentially breaking out of the wholesome box that was built for her in 2007. She is asserting her right to be associated with whoever she chooses, regardless of the optics. The breaking point also refers to the exhaustion of the public narrative. For nearly 2 decades, every interaction between these two was viewed through the lens of the 2009 tragedy. However, by 2025, a new generation of fans who were toddlers when No Air was released began to dominate the conversation. To this demographic, Sparks and Brown are legacy acts who represent a gold standard of R&B performance. They do not carry the same weight of the 2009 scandal as older millennials or Gen X critics. This shift in the fan base allowed Sparks to speak more freely without the immediate threat of a career-ending backlash. This chapter of their story reached its peak when Sparks finally addressed the question of why she never turned her back on him, even when it would have been the easiest move for her career. She suggested that her silence for all those years was not a lack of opinion, but a strategic wait for a time when the world was ready to hear a more nuanced perspective. She is no longer the girl who was told to say nothing on the red carpet. She is a woman who has seen the rise and fall of dozens of her peers and has decided that a 17-year friendship is worth more than a temporary approval from a judgmental industry. Ultimately, this reunion serves as a case study in the power of the long game. By refusing to let go of the bond they formed in 2008, Sparks and Brown have managed to outlast many of their critics. They have shown that while the media can create a narrative of isolation, the actual reality of the music community is often much more interconnected and forgiving. The breaking point was not the end of their story, but the moment the story finally moved past the shadow of 2009 and into a space of mutual, unapologetic respect. The verdict: loyalty versus accountability. The climax of 17th Year brings us to a final, inevitable confrontation between two of the most powerful forces in celebrity culture: the demand for public accountability and the stubborn reality of private loyalty. Jordin Sparks has become a central figure in this debate, not because she was involved in a scandal herself, but because she chose to navigate the fallout of one for nearly 2 decades without ever wavering. This chapter examines the legacy of that choice and what it tells us about the current state of the global entertainment industry. The verdict on the relationship between Sparks and Chris Brown is not a simple statement of right or wrong. Instead, it is a complex reflection of how we value redemption versus punishment. For 17 years, the public has viewed Sparks through a lens of moral expectation. Because she emerged from a platform like American Idol, which was built on family values and wholesome appeal, the audience felt a sense of ownership over her moral compass. When she refused to condemn Brown, it was perceived by many as a betrayal of the very brand that made her famous. However, from the perspective of the industry insiders, her stance is seen as a rare example of authentic camaraderie in a business that is notoriously transactional. One of the most significant takeaways from this long-form narrative is the shift in how the industry handles the concept of the pariah. In 2009, the response to Chris Brown was an attempt at total erasure. Radio stations, award shows, and sponsors all acted in unison to remove him from the cultural conversation. Sparks was a casualty of this erasure, forced into a silence that nearly stalled her own momentum. But as the years progressed, it became clear that the industry machine is not a moral entity. It is a profit-driven system that eventually welcomes back anyone who can still generate numbers. Sparks seemingly recognized this hypocrisy early on. Her defense of Brown was often framed as a critique of a system that profits from an artist while simultaneously claiming the moral high ground by punishing them. There is also a deep cultural and racial layer to the verdict of their loyalty. Sparks belongs to a lineage of Black female artists who have historically been expected to carry the emotional labor of protecting Black men in the public eye. This dynamic is rooted in a long history of systemic pressure, where the internal community feels a need to protect its own from a broader, often unforgiving, judicial and media system. By standing by Brown, Sparks was participating in a cultural tradition of holding space for a peer even when their actions are indefensible to the outside world. This creates a friction between her identity as a global pop star and her identity within the Black entertainment community. The accountability side of the argument remains equally potent. Critics of Sparks point out that loyalty to a friend should not come at the expense of acknowledging the gravity of domestic violence. The verdict from this perspective is that Sparks used her platform to soften the image of a man who has had multiple legal issues beyond the 2009 incident. They argue that her grace was not just a personal gift to a friend, but a public service that helped rehabilitate a brand that should have remained under heavy scrutiny. This is the unresolved tension that continues to define her career. She is seen as either a hero of friendship or a facilitator of a problematic legacy. When we move from the individual story to the universal insight, the Sparks and Brown saga reveals a fundamental truth about the nature of fame in the 21st century. We are living in an era where the boundary between the professional and the personal has completely dissolved. Sparks was not allowed to just be a singer who had a hit song with a controversial artist. She was required to be a moral arbiter for his entire life. Her refusal to fulfill that role is perhaps her most rebellious act. By staying loyal, she asserted that her personal history with a human being mattered more than the digital consensus of a billion strangers. As we look at the bigger picture, the story of these two artists reveals the fragility of the golden child archetype. The industry creates stars like Jordin Sparks to be perfect symbols of innocence, but it does not provide them with a roadmap for when life becomes messy or when their friends fall from grace. Sparks had to build that roadmap herself, often in total darkness and under intense scrutiny. The verdict on her loyalty is that it was a survival mechanism. It was a way to maintain a sense of self in a world that was constantly trying to tell her who she should be and who she should hate. This video does not offer a neat resolution because the story is still being written. Chris Brown remains a polarizing figure who continues to break records and headlines, while Jordin Sparks has matured into a veteran voice who no longer seeks permission to speak. Their 17-year journey is a testament to the fact that the industry can ghost a song, cancel a performance, and scrub a red carpet, but it cannot easily break a bond that started in a midnight studio session before the world began to watch. The air between them is still thick with history, and perhaps the greatest mystery of all is that they are both still standing, still breathing, and still refusing to let the silence have the last word. As a new generation of fans begins to prioritize musical talent over decades-old headlines, are we witnessing the final success of a strategic long game, or will the silence of that 2009 Grammy night always haunt the air between them? If you found this investigative breakdown insightful, consider supporting the channel. Please like this video and subscribe for more in-depth cultural analysis and celebrity case studies.